Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of the Stokes Sound podcast. I'm your host, Ed Stokes, and today we are super lucky to have Nashville mixing engineer Brent Hendrich. Brent, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Brent, if you want to introduce yourself to our listeners, tell our listeners a little bit about what you do. I mean, we know you're a mixing engineer, but if you want to give us some more information, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll try to, I maybe won't go super far back, but I've been here in Nashville working on, doing music professionally for, I guess, close to 20 years, just as a freelancer. I've been actually in town for 23 years. I moved here when I was 18, and I did audio school at a school called SAE, which is like a 9-month technical school, and finished that when I was 19, and then started doing internships with a few different people and learned kind of how records were actually made. And then, in my early 20s, decided to start doing the freelance thing. And at that time, in the early days, it was doing a little bit of everything. I definitely had like a passion for production as well. So I was producing projects, I was co-writing, I was playing some guitar, I was mixing, tracking everything, doing pretty much everything except for mastering. And, that was like probably the first 15 years, or actually no, I just stopped producing just a couple years ago. I kind of got to a place where I realized that I just want to be doing, I just want to become more specialized, I guess. Mixing was always like my favorite portion of the process, and had a little bit more flexibility, and just decided to kind of go all in and strictly start mixing. And so that's what I've been doing the past couple of years. So, work with a lot of independent artists here in Nashville, nothing really in country, primarily just pop, some singer-songwriters, occasional rock thing here and there. There's not as much of that as there used to be, but work out of my studio that's here in my house, and I've been working in the same room for since 2008. So I know the room really, really well. The monitoring has changed once or twice, but it's a super comfortable space that I love coming up and working in every single day. So I've got it kind of dialed in just for my personal taste. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Amazing. So, let's get into the topic. I mean, absolutely fantastic to hear all of that stuff. And so this is going to be a great topic that's going to lead on to, you mentioned that you've been a freelance mixing engineer for a long time now. And, there's a lot of mixing engineers, and the traditional route was to, start in studios, be an assistant, build your way up, and then, you do mix work. And it was really interesting to hear what you said there, how you did, a lot of production. You were kind of putting your hands in kind of everything, I guess, to I guess make ends meet, kind of, going into this, meeting people, making connections and networking, and then kind of building up a portfolio. And now obviously, mixing full time and doing amazing. So, as far as kind of, well, first of all, how have you found going from doing everything to now just specializing in mixing? Like, do you feel like you're, doing much more better because you're only focusing on mixing side of things, or what's your kind of take on that?
I think so. I think I'm providing the most value to the music community by just mixing, because as much as I love production and tracking and all those other things, I feel like mixing is what I'm best at, and I think just by mixing full time, I'm kind of like utilizing my greatest talent every single day. I started realizing there's a lot of other great producers in town that are also, really, really good at production as well. And I don't know, it's just, I'm at a place now where I really enjoy like focusing on one thing and just trying to get like just a little bit better every single day at one thing. I feel like when I was doing the production engineering mixing, it was just, I was like pretty good at 4 or 5 things, and I just got to a place, I think, where maybe it was with age or something like that. I also love the flexibility of being just a mixer. But I think it was just wanting to, focus on what I enjoy and what I feel like, I'm the best at. And so that's kind of, I guess, why it happened. More and more people started hiring me just for mixing. And also, I think more than ever before, there's a lot of self-production happening. The artists are just doing it themselves. And so maybe there's a little less production work out there than there was 10 years ago. So maybe that had something to do with it. I wasn't really thinking like that. But so that's kind of what got me to this point. I don't know if hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, a lot of our listeners, some of them do production, a
Hmm.
lot of them kind of mainly do mixing. And a question that I get asked, as a mixer as well, is kind of, I only want to do mix work, but I feel like sometimes I have to do the production to get the mix work. That kind of seems to be
Hmm.
said.
Sure.
Some people say that, and because as you
Hmm.
mentioned, a lot of producers mix, and then it kind of takes away from the mixing work because the client, especially independent artists, I don't feel always necessarily know what a mixing engineer does. They just kind of, expects a producer to do that. So, when it comes down to like marketing yourself, I know the listeners would be interested in how you've obviously made that transition to go from
Hmm.
doing a little bit of everything to just mixing.
Hmm.
Now, social media is a major thing
Hmm.
in 2023,
Sure.
especially with the TikToks, the Instagram. And do you feel like social media has played a massive part in you being able to transition from, doing everything to just mixing? Or do you feel like you've just
No,
kind of fallen into it?
I think that's a small part of it. I definitely was not doing much on the social media side of things 3 or 4 years ago, and
Yeah.
just decided it was time to really like that's where my target audience was Instagram, and so I decided to kind of go all in on Instagram and hired a social media coordinator, Samantha, who's been working with me for I guess about 3 or 4 years now, and so she helps with a lot of that. So I'm actually like investing time and money now every single week into that, and I do think that's important, especially when it comes to like front of mind, just constantly reminding people that you're out there and you're doing stuff. It's like, oh, Brent, I forgot. Yeah, at least you get him to mix the next record. That stuff happens, and so that's why
Yeah.
I do think social media is a good thing. I think what made the transition easier for me was just like all of the compounding that had happened over the 20 years of my career. So just all the relationships that I've built and the network that I built made it a lot easier where people who were records who I did everything on, maybe now they're producing, but they're still going to send it to me, to mix, or maybe I set them up with someone else to produce it, and just say, hey, I'll hook you up with this production work, but I'm going to be the one that mixes it. So there's some of that kind of stuff that happens as well. Um, but yeah, I think what made the transition easiest was just having like a foundation that had already been set over a long period of time, and just um, people, knowing me and what I do, and I think I didn't really go about it even reaching out to like previous clients. I think it was pretty obvious to them once I started changing over websites and social media and the way that I kind of present myself and the type of content that even I'm creating. It's to, as a mixer now, and so that's kind of what I've done with the past clients, but then I'm also like spending a lot of time as well, like trying to get into new circles, and start mixing the projects that I want to really be working on, not just working with the clients that I've previously had, but there's certain types of music and certain genres that I really am focused on right now. Just once again, just
Yeah.
getting more and more specialized, and not just being a mixer, but being known as like a top 40 sounding mixer. If you want like a slick pop thing, a very precise mix, Brent's our guy. And so that's kind of the big push for me right now. The transition just into mixing was was a big step, and it was a little bit scary, but that's kind of come and gone now, and now it's more about just building lots of new relationships, and that's like what I'm focused on more than pretty much anything else right now. Is I mean, obviously getting better every single day as a mixer, but any energy that I have, left over is all about spending the money to travel to other cities and meet with the people and take people out to lunch, coffee, whatever, just to get to know the producers that are making the kind of records that I really dig and that I want to be a part of. So there's a lot of different things that I'm doing. There's the nurturing the past clients, and then kind of building relationships with the people I want to be working with as well. So.
That's amazing. I mean, someone like you with, lots of experience and really good at what you do, you know, because of all the experience, word of mouth obviously happens, and, and
Hmm.
that builds up more and more the more clients you have. So it kind of just is like a domino effect. But, that's really, great stuff what you said there. And I think, the listeners listening, I think you really, have to take into account of, making those connections and understanding, what the artist or the producer wants. I mean, do
Hmm.
you find, Brent, with a lot of the independent stuff you work on as well, do you find that you're dealing with the artist or the producer more so? Because you mentioned about since lockdown, a lot of artists have been self-producing and
Hmm.
actually they've been making great stuff. And so, do you find that you are dealing with more artists or more producers in terms of that kind of setting?
Yeah, probably more producers. The kind of stuff that I want to be working on, usually there's a producer involved as well. And so
Yeah,
usually, yeah, typically I would send, a mix to be reviewed to the producer. The producer would share it with the artist, and then any feedback that the artist has comes to the producer, and they're kind of like the middleman. And so, yeah, normally I'm working with the producer, which I probably prefer just because we speak the same language a little bit
yeah.
easier. Sometimes with an artist, it's like they just say, "I
I
want
know
it
the
more
feeling.
purple" or something. It's like, okay. Whereas a producer's like, "There's too much 250 hertz in the kick drum" or something. So it is a lot. It is a lot easier when I do interact with the producer, I think, as opposed to the artist.
Yeah,
It's just I think we get where we need to go a little bit quicker. So, but
yeah.
there's times too where the artist has self-produced, and the files come directly to me from that artist, and we make it work as well. I enjoy working with both. I think I have to adapt, when it comes to communication. I have to kind of simplify and not try to, you know, get too technical with them. So you kind of have to know who you're working with, but it's a little of both.
Yeah.
But usually it's more so probably producers than artists.
How do you find mixing self-produced artists that do it themselves? Do you find it a bit more of a challenge as a mixer, or you know?
Yeah, usually. I mean, with a producer, often they have some engineering chops and are, thinking about, oh wow, this room that we're cutting this vocal in is super reflective, and there's all this resonance and building up, and it sound. A producer would often pick up on that and go, okay, we need to do something to fix this. We need to create some type of booth or tunnel or something to get inside of, or that's just one example. Whereas like an artist that's cutting their vocal, they may just throw up a mic in the middle of a little boxy room, that's nothing but drywall, and not really be thinking about those kinds of things. And so that introduces so many more challenges as a mixer, having to figure out, how am I going to deal with that, or a bunch of hum and electric guitar. A producer may be like, oh, we need to like turn the dimmers off, on the lights.
Yeah,
So I think with a producer, they're going to have more experience with those kinds of situations and know exactly what needs to happen to remedy, the problem at hand. So I do think it is more often. Yeah, I mean, I find myself doing more editing or RXing or
yeah.
removing
RX, my best
issues.
friend.
Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that I think you
Yeah,
deal with when it comes directly from the artist. If they're, a self-producing artist and it's all kind of in the box production where it's all just samples and synths and all that, then usually it's more of just the vocal that I have to worry with if it hasn't been
yeah.
recorded well. But if they can get that right, then usually it's pretty easy to make it happen.
I find as well, like, I mean, I'm sure you get this as well, but you mentioned about the hum, but I feel like sometimes when you're mixing for a great producer, they've done a lot of the tidying, a lot of like
Hmm.
the moving, the nudging and everything. And then when lockdown happened, you got, like you said, self-producing artists came, they recorded their vocals, but you were, in a way, I can imagine if it was similar to, my experience of it, you were kind of also producing the vocal at the same time, because you were having, I mean, some of the sessions I got through, it was like you had to finish off the comping or cut
Yeah.
things out, the breaths, nudge things around. So,
Hmm.
sometimes it's nice when a producer's kind of already done that for you, and you can just, solely focus on the sonics
Sure.
of
Yeah.
that.
I've found the better the producer and the better the song, the easier it is to mix. Typically, when I get files from a great producer and it's a really great song, I mean, they've thought about the arrangement, and the arrangement, plays such a big part in like the mix, and just knowing like what elements are working together and what elements are clashing. Just thinking about those kinds of things, they're really good about that, and they're also not afraid to consolidate things. They make bolder moves, and they just bake a lot of stuff in. Maybe they're compressing some to tape, and yeah, it's one of those things where you pull up the faders, and within like 5 minutes you're pretty much at the rough already. That's the dream mix right there, to where then you have whatever
Yeah,
the day or half a day or whatever you need to take it and get that other whatever 25% out of where they left it. And those are like the dream gigs for me, I think, as opposed to here's a bunch of
Yeah.
unlabeled stuff and it just doesn't make any sense, and you got to figure out, what to delete, and yeah. So I do enjoy
Worst
working on the
nightmare.
projects that are nice and tidy. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. The more unorganized it is, the more my mix price goes up.
Yeah. Yeah. I've often thought about that. Yeah. It needs to, maybe it's not a per song rate. Maybe it's a, per headache rate or something like that.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. So I mean, as far as then, like, we can go into a little bit of, your workflow as a
Sure.
mixer. So, you get an artist or a producer, and they send you files, and hopefully, as we said, it's all labeled
Mhm.
and it's all perfect. What's like the Brent way of doing it? Kind of what's your, I know we're going a little bit technical here, but it'll be
Yeah.
interesting for our listeners to know kind of what you do. So if any of our listeners were to send you a track to
Mhm.
mix, or what do you do?
Yeah.
Give
I
away all your
usually,
secrets.
I start with a conversation with the producer artist, like just letting them know kind of what kind of delivery formats I want, and it's kind of being as specific as possible to try and get the files correctly the first time. So I want all the, there's different songs require different ways of exporting. I feel like I usually don't mix from people's project files because so many people are in so many different DAWs. There's like 6 or 7 different DAWs that people use that I know. So it makes more sense to get either dry multi-tracks. Well, it depends. Like if it's a country thing or something that's very what I would call organic, or singer-songwriter where it's like live drums and bass and keys, then it probably, I'm going to get stuff that's just, maybe some stuff was baked in on the tracking session, but that's it. And I'll start, and that's usually when I have a lot more control over the mix, when they're just more like, you do your thing. So for a project like that, that's usually how I would get the files. Maybe it's like 57 different multi-tracks, a lot of mono stuff. And, it's multiple kicks, mics, and snare, and all that. And so that's like more the old school approach. And then, if it's a pop thing where the producer has been really heavy-handed with effects, like creative signature effects and all that, then I prefer a lot of that to get baked into the files, whether that's stems or on the individual tracks. With the lead vocal, I definitely would prefer to have a dry version of that. But if you have like 3 different kick drums that you blended together a certain way and the phase is good and all that, like just print that to one stereo kick track. I don't need all 3 of those to try and recreate your blend that you were really loving, So I do think that for example, a pop mix, preserving a lot of that, those things that the producer and the artist are used to is important. Because in the pop world, it seems like a lot of people really want you to stay close to the rough, and getting those files rendered the right way. It starts right there. So that's kind of the first step, is just making sure I get the kind of files that I need to deliver what I know that they're looking for. And I also have a conversation with them about like their expectations. I have a survey off of my website where if they want to fill that out, they can give me like all the info about the song, and there's they can tell me how close to the rough they want it. There's a lot of adjectives as to like what kind of things do you want it, dark or bright or dynamic or squashed, or all of these different things. And so I can get a really good idea of how close to the rough, like how do they want this to feel, how loud do they want the vocal on top in the mix, tucked? Do they have someone in mind for mastering? If so, that lets me know maybe what I need to do on the mix side of things. And a few other questions. If they want any additional services, I can Melodyne, vocal align, all of those types of things as well. So once I have the files that I need and we've had that conversation, I'm really in their heads as to what they're looking for. And then it kind of, I guess the next step would be probably prepping the mix. And depending on my workload, kind of depends on how that happens. Well, first of all, if it needs, any additional services like Melodyne, I'll usually, my assistant Ben will do a lot of that, and then I'll kind of come in and just check it all and sign off on it, and see if there's anything else that I want to modify to his work. If there's a ton of stuff on my plate, he'll also prep all the mixes. He has my current template at all times on his computer, and we use an application called Resilio Sync, which allows me to select certain folders on my audio drive that he also has access to. So he can open it up on his machine and prep and then save and close. And then just a few seconds later, that application refreshes everything on my drive. And so it's a really seamless way to work off of a drive, even when you're not in the same place. So we use that, and that's typically if things start piling up. If I'm not underwater and I have the time, I prefer. It's sometimes easier just for me to do it, and I have the workflow down to where it's pretty quick, especially if the files are right. If they've sent me the right kind of files, my template is very refined. I've been refining it for years and years, and so there's no audio tracks in my template. It's just, well, there are two. There's two stereo audio tracks. One is for the rough, and one is for like if I want to record Spotify in or something like that, and find some reference. So there's kind of like the stereo reference track and then the stereo rough track. And then all of the audio files that I receive will then kind of fall after that. So those are on the far left, those two tracks. And then all my audio files, and then all my effects returns or next. There's probably 30 different things, so many different types of verbs and delays and slapbacks and chorus and some auto panning, kind of motion type stuff. And so that's just always there. It's like all of my favorite stuff. And so it just allows me to be really creative and not be thinking about that. And if none of those things work, then I'm not afraid to throw in some other reverb that's not in the template later on. But and then all of that stuff then gets funneled into kind of what I call my food groups. And then those food groups get fed into like a final group that I just call my mix print. And that's where I have all my mix bus processing on that group. And then that then feeds into just like this stereo output that I call listen. So by doing that, I can send my reference and the rough directly to the listen output without getting the mix bus processing, but then all of my audio files and my effects returns are still going into that mix print bus. So it just allows me to kind of keep those two separate. And then on that listen output, that's where I'd maybe keep like a spectrum analyzer if I want to visually see what the mix is looking like. Either with I typically would use FabFilter Pro Q3. I like that spectrum analyzer, or Span. I have a preset on Span that I like. And so so really it's just bringing in the audio files and then routing the output of the audio files where they need to go, and then creating a marker track, making sure that everything syncs up to the grid, going back and forth between the rough and my files just to make sure I have everything is important. Nothing worse than like sending a mix that you love and then they're like, oh, it's missing like these two tracks. And you're like, oh, okay, I built this whole mix around the content that I had. Let's squeeze these in somehow. So, so once all that's happened, then I try to spend a little bit of time with the rough. Sometimes I have to force myself to, and I just listen to the rough and go, okay, like what are the things that I think they really dig about this rough, and then what are the things that I think I can make a lot better that they will be okay with, and lots of times it seems to be, I'm trying to think of some of the common things, just a lot of frequency masking. I hear a ton of that usually in a rough. So I can clean all that up with, just EQ and panning and level placement and all that. And then also, another thing is it seems like often the bass is just like way too loud. And I think that's often poor monitoring environments. And so it's just like choking some limiter that they have on their mix bus. And so, once I've listened to their rough, I'll just get started. I usually will turn off my mix bus processing, which is 4 or 5 inserts typically, I think somewhere around there. I'll turn all that off and just start gainstaging with the kick and snare and kind of hit roughly where I want to hit, and then I'll quickly turn on the mix bus, which is kind of like a always starting in one spot, and then there may be some slight refining along the way. But I'll get I try to get that on really, really early on in the mix stage, because every decision you're making is based on what's happening there, and so yeah, once I kind of get the kick and snare gain stage right, I'll flip on the processing and then get the kick and snare feeling really good against that. Maybe make a few dB up and down adjustments with those two elements and get that feeling right, and start to bring in more elements of the drums, and then maybe I'll bring in the vocal or the bass, and start to just kind of introduce more and more things. I try now. I used to be really bad about this, but I try now to like work with all the elements in as much as possible, and before reaching that solo button, just crank it up another 6 or 8 dB. What you're getting ready to EQ and work that way, as opposed
Yeah.
to making EQ decisions in solo. So yeah, so I'll just kind of get a rough balance, gain stage balance, and get everything feeling pretty good, and then just start picking at it one little thing at a time, and making thousands and thousands of little decisions that make for a really great mix. So that's a long answer,
Do you,
but
do you mix into it?
a mix into the mix bus.
So do you mix into the mix bus? Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I am making some adjustments. Like maybe the EQ on the mix bus, it starts flat, but maybe I'm like, oh, I take a couple dB out of here as I'm moving further along. Sometimes it just makes more sense to me to, like, as I'm in that last 20%, especially of the mix, go, okay, I'm not really, I mean, like if there's too much, whatever, 600, sometimes I just will take, a couple dB out with the mix bus EQ, as opposed to figuring out where that's at, or maybe it's a lot of different things. So it does make more sense to do it there. So it's almost like, in some ways, I feel like I'm doing like a pre-mastering process. Things are pretty loud when it goes off to mastering, and it's been, processed pretty heavily as far as, there's some little bit of compression and widening and EQ and limiting and, some Oxford inflator and all those types of things. It's definitely not this, pure, clean, organic, super dynamic mix bus. It's like me getting it exactly where I want it, and not giving the mastering engineer too much control, because I'm a control freak, I guess, or maybe it's just I've done it enough to know what I want.
Yeah.
And so I want the mastering engineer to, make it just a little bit louder, and maybe make a couple of like, small little EQ tweaks, things maybe I missed that they're hearing on fresh ears. And that's typically the process. Once I feel really good about, I try not to live with that first mix for too long. I try to get it to the producer and the artist sooner than later. It's easy for, I think, a beginner to spend 3 days like messing with something and then taking it too far, and then yeah. So I really I encourage people to, like, start on a mix maybe in the morning, and work on it all day if you want, and then the next morning, listen for, work on it for a couple hours, just see what like really sticks out. Like, I'm a big fan of a lot of like stepping away from things, and by working in the box, it's really easy to do that. Like maybe you mix just 2 hours and then an hour off, and then 2 hours on and 1 hour off, because those first 10 minutes of pulling that mix project up are so revealing for me personally. So yeah, I mean, all the things that are really sticking out hit me right when I open up that project file. So if you're working on an EP, I highly recommend like maybe a few hours on the first song, and then jump over to the next song, and then and just jump around a lot, as opposed to thinking like I need to do the first song and then do the second song and work in chronological order. I really think it's nice if you like to have all of those fresh perspective moments without living with a mix for too long. That's usually the approach that I take.
That's really great advice. Do you know one thing actually that has come up before when I've had other people onto the show is Gainstaging, and I always get a lot of feedback from the listeners, especially if they're new mixing engineers, or they're just coming up. And with all your experience, I mean, I always say, obviously a lot of the plugins are emulations of the real gear, and there are certain sweet spots, which is like minus 18 is 0 dB and all of that kind of stuff. Now, within your mixing and what you do, you mentioned there a couple of times about the gain staging. Would you mind telling our audience about your view on the gain stage in your particular mix, and what are you looking for, with the frequency spectrum as well that you mentioned?
Sure.
and that kind of stuff? That would be great stuff to hear.
I don't think too much about it. It's a little bit instinctual at this point. I will say that before I add any inserts, that's when I try to get the gain staging right. That's kind of where it all starts for me. And I like to keep my faders, on the high side, just for that resolution that you have.
Yeah.
And so, I don't typically like to use clip gain for gain staging, just because if I'm like building out kind of a template on song 1 and I'm going to take it to song 3, 4, and 5, then I've got to clip gain all the audio files on those songs the same kind of way to get the
Yeah.
input into the channel. So I like to do it. In an ideal world, you'd maybe have all your faders at Unity, and then I would get my kick and snare. Maybe they're soloed and they're hitting my mix bus with those faders at Unity. Maybe they're that'd probably be hitting around like somewhere between -18 and -12, I think is usually where that lives. And usually the files that I receive, that means you're taking, I don't know, 10 or 15 dB of gain away sometimes. And so I would do that on the actual, the input gain. I work primarily in Cubase and have been for a long time. And there is an input gain. I don't know, in Pro Tools, you might have to actually do it with plugins. Because they're not an actual channel script built in. Trim. Yeah. Is trim built into the mixer, or do you have to add that as a plugin?
Add it as a plugin.
Okay. Yeah. So you'd maybe you just have trim.
Plugin, yeah.
Yeah.
Or clip gain if you want it.
Yeah.
Then,
And so, like I said, I prefer not to do clip gain just because then when I carry my template over, it seems to be a lot easier. So, so I would, be using that as like, usually to kind of take away however much I need to on that kick and snare. And then, and kind of almost like you're doing a rough mix. You could be doing a rough mix with that trim plugin or some type of input gain. And then that lets you know that like everything is fairly optimal. I don't really think about it this much. I'm just thinking like what I would teach someone to do.
Yeah. It's funny when you talk about it, isn't it? You kind of go, oh, that's what I do.
I don't know. I just start like, I try not to get too in my head and think about like numbers and that kind of stuff, technical things. I try to be as creative as possible. So I'm moving pretty quick. And I'm often not like, maybe there's times where it's not optimal, but I'm trying not to get like stuck in that world. But and then that lets me know that
trim on your mix bus.
Yeah,
on the top of the mix bus.
I always leave my mix buses always at Unity, and that never changes unless like there's some type of fade out or something where I have an automated fade out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would try to keep the faders as high as you can, and you can even use like some type of VU meter, I guess, plugin. I mean, if you had like a VU that had a gain knob on it as well, you could use something like that. Then that lets you know that you're going to hit those plugins that follow. You're going to hit those optimally, and you can make adjustments along the way and just turn stuff until it sounds cool to you. That's really all that matters. Just use your ears more than do math is what I always would suggest. But that's I guess how I would do things. I mean, that's how I think about it. I use that input gain. It happens really fast. Checking phase too. Sometimes just throwing on some filters and things just to take away stuff that's doesn't need to be there. So that's kind of the first step before plugins ever happen. And then from there with plugins, I just try to the way I think of it is like, if I bypass it, it should be roughly about the same volume as when it was on, and that lets you know that input and output's about the same, and But no, I don't know. Some stuff probably sounds better like when you hit it a little harder, and some stuff you kind of have to watch. But I don't really think about it too much. It's just if it feels good, then I'd keep moving forward, and if something's wrong, I'll try and figure out where it's happening. And
That's
usually
the thing. Mix is about feeling, isn't it? It's what I always say to people. It's about if it vibes, it's good. I mean, I know what the next question is going to be that people are going to ask, and they're going to say, before you send it to mastering, do you aim to hit a certain level, or again numbers, or do you just not care as long as you're given a little bit?
Yeah, I give them a few dB to squeeze out of it. It's usually, I don't know, the LUFS around integrated like probably -10 somewhere around there, so it's pretty hot. I like maybe it's -11 somewhere around there. I like masters usually like in that -8 to 9 kind of window where it's really hot, but it's not like folding in on itself hot. Yeah. So I'm using Usually either the FabFilter Pro L2 or Ozone. I've been enjoying the new Ozone limiter a lot. I think
Yeah.
it sounds really good. I have quite a bit of clippers too. I don't use as many clippers as some people, but
Do you keep the clipper on before mastering? Because I find myself, I've got a clipper on my mix bus, but I always keep that on even if I send it to mastering because I feel like the clipper has a sound.
exactly. Yeah. I
Yeah,
always recommend like whatever the client and the producer approve, that's what should go to mastering.
yeah,
And
love it.
there's
Yeah,
even the occasional time where it's like it goes to mastering, like, I love, I like the mix, whatever the mix is doing, that's like it. Let's just release that. So that happens occasionally too, where the mix just, even though you spend the money on the mastering, it's just and it may be kind of like demoitis where people get really attached to the rough mix as
yeah,
well and just have a really hard time letting go. So that may be what's happening there, but yeah, it happens, and it's usually okay if that is the case. Or maybe I'll pull it right back up and try to just juice a little bit more out of it
yeah.
with the limiter. But yeah, that's the approach. I mean, if you're nervous about it, then I think you could just print, a mix with everything, and then they'll maybe even have that limiter or clipper on, but just take, just make sure there's no actual like gain reduction, and then maybe that color's still there a little bit, but it's not chopping off anything,
Yeah.
and then then that gives your mastering engineer a little bit more flexibility. But I just think the
Yeah.
longer you do it, the more confident you become in what you're sending out. I know all the people that I look up to, they they're like, I mean, they send hot mixes all the time, and those records sound great. So I just figured I'm going to do that
Yeah.
too.
That's what it's all about, sounding great, right? If it
Yep.
sounds great, it
Yep.
is good.
Yep.
So, Brent, then, if we're talking about like your day to day in a week, we've mentioned
Mm-hmm.
marketing, and we talked about social media, and we're talking about kind of a little bit of technical aspects there. So, as far as you're a freelance mixing engineer. So,
Mm-hmm.
anybody that's listening to this, coming up, wanting to do exactly what you do, what's like your I guess day to day week?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of engineers are known to be working 20 hours a day, Saturday, Sundays, ridiculous, like no life at all. Do
Yeah,
you kind of maintain a normal working lifestyle in your world as a freelance mixer?
I do.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't in my 20s. I have a wife and two little kids now, so I have to
yeah,
make time for other people. I think, when I was in town, 18 to, my early 30s, it was just me, and I'm as passionate about making records today as I was, 23, or really, almost 30 years ago. And so, yeah, I would just do it all the time, and I'd wake up and work all day and not worry about working in the night because there was no one else, and so it didn't matter. Whereas now I have a lot more structure.
yeah,
I work, usually, get up to my studio at 8 or so in the morning, 8 a.m., and then I'll work till about 5, and then start to kind of get ready to, have dinner with my family, and then just unwind in the evenings. Every once in a while, if things kind of are getting backed up, or if I'm really like wanting to learn more about whatever, a plugin or something like that, I'll sneak upstairs to my studio, and
yeah.
once everyone's kind of
That's the beauty of
down
having
for
a
bed.
studio at home, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah,
So, maybe everyone's winding down and going to bed. I can, get another hour or two before, getting to bed. And I'm a morning person, so I usually get up around 6. And kind of in that 6 to
yeah,
7 a.m. window too, I can often sneak up here as well, and, get something prepped for the day, or, respond to some emails or caption some posts for social media or whatever. And so, yeah,
yeah,
it's pretty, pretty structured. I like to make time for, then I don't work much on the weekends. It's pretty much spending time with family, um and I guess
you got the
if
work-life
if
balance right then.
yeah, it's taken a little bit of time,
Yeah,
but with my personality, I like things just a very specific way, and I don't know, I make time for, I mean, as much as I love making records, my wife and kids are even more important than that, and so
of
they
course.
always have to come
Yeah,
first. But yeah, so if I feel like, you know if you, ever, you don't want everything amazing in your professional world, but then have all this chaos outside of your world, you kind of need to like have keep everything at peace, and if my wife is happy or unhappy because I'm working all the time, then that's just going to affect my work. But if I know that my kids feel like they've seen their dad a bunch, and my wife is happy and she's getting to do stuff that she wants to do on the weekends or whatever, then it just makes for that whole wheel or whatever you want to call it. Is just every like little spoke is nice and strong. So that's
I'm
the
so
way I
glad you
look
said
at it, I guess.
that.
Yeah.
I'm in the same. I'm in the same position as you. I've got a 1-year-old daughter and a wife as well. So
Okay.
it's making time.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're alike in that sense.
Yeah. It's
It's good when everybody else on the outside's happy. Your mixes are honestly better.
Yeah. Now, if we didn't have schools and daycares, I don't know, it would be a lot more challenging. I'd be way more stressed out. But thankfully, everyone
Yeah,
has a place to go Monday through Friday during the day.
yeah,
And sometimes I think having like these specific work windows, you're more efficient. You get more done just because you have like a certain kind of window. I think some
more
people work
productive. Yeah,
15 hours a day, and I could be more productive in 5 hours. Just because they're like taking breaks and going out to lunch somewhere and this and that and jumping on a call that ends up taking forever. And so I just make sure that I use my time wisely. But it's whatever. It's 50 hours or something a week, and that's really that's all that most people should work. So
yeah.
that's where I'm at. It's different for everyone. I mean, I'm sure if you have really demanding deadlines and demanding producers, or you're working on really huge records or something. You're working with Max Martin, and then the Weeknd's next single like needs to be something. Whatever, you make exceptions here and there, but
Yeah.
usually. Deadlines are kind of funny to me in the world that I work in. It's like, okay, this can wait another day. It's not the end
Yeah.
of the world. So yeah, that's how I approach, my week to week.
I think that's great. I mean, you're managing time to a perfection by the sounds of it. It's getting the ball rolling and kind of just managing. And I guess through your experience of mixing
Mhm.
for so long and being, I guess, freelance. I mean, have you been freelance your whole career, or is that a recent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since I think so. It's probably around 20 years now. I've just been
Wow,
a self-employed freelancer. Yeah. So,
that's amazing.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, there was, in the early days, there were stressful times for sure. But like I
Yeah.
mentioned, compounding really starts to kind of happen, and your clientele, that list like grows and grows and grows. And so you have, if you deliver great customer service, you have these recurring clients that kind of come back. And I still work with clients that I've worked with for 10 or 15 years now. And so it's
Yeah.
just, yeah, you build a relationship, you do really great work, you make them love the experience, and then they come back for more. And then you're building new relationships, and you're doing the same thing with those, fostering those relationships. And it just takes time. It's going to be challenging, for most people early on, and you just have to. Maybe that means a part-time job, or maybe that means also doing some stuff outside of music, where it's, I don't know, editing audiobooks or podcast, or doing something for an indie film, or just working, a part-time job, and then 2 days a week, those are your music making days. That may be kind of where you start, and then you grow from there. But yeah, it just takes time for most people, and it has for me as well. Every year it gets a little bit easier. I have a little bit more flexibility, and yeah,
Yeah.
I don't, and the job gets
That means you're
easier
doing
too.
something right.
Yeah, the job gets easier. You become more confident in your work. I think that's something that took a lot of time
Yeah.
for me. Um, it's just feeling good. I mean, it probably took 15 years probably for me to like really just feel good about printing this mix and going, this mix is good. Like, I'm not second guessing anything. It's really good. If they don't like it, maybe they're just looking for something slightly different, and we'll get there. I'm not worried about it. Same with building,
That's a great way to
uh,
view it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and same with building relationships with like producers that are doing great work. I feel like now it's much easier to sell myself to them, because I know that I'm at a place now where the product is a lot better than it was 10 years ago, and just feel more confident about that as well. So that's another good thing about
Yeah.
sticking with it, is the longer you stick with it, the more clients you kind of bring in, as well as I think the more that I think your confidence just grows with your abilities, I guess. And so you have to
Yeah.
get those reps in,
And your
get
and
those
your team grows
10,000,
as
20,000.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
for sure.
and your
For sure.
team grows as well. I remember you saying you had early in the podcast you have was it someone called Ben, your assistant, or you have
Oh,
someone
Ben. Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Good memory. Yep. Yeah. He was my most recent intern, and he's not interning anymore, but he knows my world really well. He has, the same software, and I got everything kind of set up for him on his laptop. So he can just at any point in time kind of be on call and just be like, hey, I need this stuff, whatever tuned or this prepped by a certain, day. And he always makes it happen. He's finishing up actually at a university here in town right now. And so it's just nice having someone like that can kind of help out when you need it, but maybe they're not on staff, to where you're paying them even because there's times where it's like you're slammed, and times where it's just like really manageable, and so that's the situation or the scenario that works out well for me. It's not like he's here at my studio like every single day. I don't think I'd like that anyway. So it's more remote work that he's doing for me. So
I think that's also where like the mixing world is kind of going though, isn't it? It's everything's becoming online, and I mean, as far as like the business aspect of it, it's a great way of doing. If you're too busy because you're mixing it, but you need a vocal tune, you can just I guess freelance that out. Sharing the work as well. I mean, do you find actually that just reminded me regarding about sending work out for tuning, for example. Do you find, in 2023, everybody loves Melodyne, everybody loves auto-tuning. Do you find that a lot of the mixes that you get in have already been tuned, or do you find that you are tuning them in your mixing process?
Usually it's already been done, but there are a few clients that, they don't feel confident enough to do it. Maybe they're a little bit intimidated by something like Melodyne. Maybe that's more of the artist producer that's like, I don't know what all these lines mean, and I'd rather just have someone do it that, has years and years of experience in the program. And so it's just a service that I'm able to add that, is nice. I think it's good for mixing and mastering engineers to have these additional services. It's a way to bring in a little extra income, and some people don't want to do all that work. They'd rather just,
and it's quite hard as well.
Yeah,
it's very skillful. To
get
it right.
Yeah, exactly. And so it just depends. The more experienced clients, they're the ones that are usually doing a lot of that themselves. Sometimes they're just using auto-tune, and that's good enough for them, and we'll stick with that. But yeah, I personally like the melodyning note by note, and then using some type of subtle auto-tune as well, kind of after that. And that's usually more, I guess, for like a sound, whereas the Melodyne to me is more about being able to control the drift and the vibrato and some of those things that you really can't like. I want to be in control of all those things. I don't want to leave all that up to auto-tune, and especially with things like.
Do you center the notes on Melodyne? Do you center everything, or do you kind of use the Alt button and kind of drag and literally just use your ears up and down throughout?
I mean, most of the stuff, the segment often is pretty centered, but the way I think about it is the pitch isn't the segment, it's that squiggly line, and so even though the segment is centered, it's just more like averaging basically. And so I know that there's still, slight, hundredths of a cent sharp or flat, happening throughout that note. So yeah, I mean, I stay more centered. Maybe that's just because I like the pop thing, and like,
of course,
a little bit perfect and fake kind of is cool in that sound. It depends on the record, as well. I really also just like being able to adjust vibrato and that drift as well. Low notes that start to like fall flat on a long note. I love being able to like stabilize that. Or if someone gets
drift is the best. I think that's the best invention in Melodyne.
It is. I
feel like modulation can make it a bit auto-tuned, but drift can make it really just natural but tuned.
Yeah. With modulation, you have to be careful with that. I feel like 75%, lower than 75%, you start to kind of hear that like just really straight, like robotic kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, I like to be a bit more in control on the tuning side of things if possible, and then just be a bit more subtle. But if you're doing, some type of hip hop thing where you want it like super T-pained out, then I don't know, maybe it's not even worth. Maybe it's not worth melodyning, especially if they've been monitoring and loving it, raw
auto-tune.
to auto-tune, by throwing Melodyne in the middle there, it may not quite wig out auto-tune the way that they were, enjoying it. So every project, it's dependent on the project for me.
Fantastic. I've got two questions
Okay.
to finish up with, and the one question that I know we mentioned, more towards the start of the show was social media, and I know that the listeners would want to know how much of social media in kind of your week, I guess, or how much do you kind of implement into your mixing business? Some people say I do 1 hour a day, 1 hour a week. Do you have, in your self-employment as a mixer, do you have like a specific time where you always do something on social media every week, and that these guys that are listening should do the same thing to build up a career?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be different for different people. I mean, for me, when Samantha and I first kind of met and came up with a plan, our weekly goal that we set, and we've met it for years and years now, every single week, is 3 posts, 4 to 5 stories. Every other Friday is a reel. And so that's the formula that we use. So that means that every week so basically what I do is I bring in different photographers to different sessions, and that's where I get a lot of my content. That's like more of the images of me that are used for a lot of posts, but then also every once in a while it'll be like a screenshot of a plugin or showcasing a new single that I mixed. Need to be better about that. So there's several different types of, or like a clip from a podcast like this. So there's different types of content that come in for those 3 posts a week, and then the stories I try to be just going to give people a glimpse of my personal life. I think it's a good place for that, or just a screenshot of some cool thing I've figured out that day with a plugin, something that it does, or those kind, or a poll. I love polls and questions. That's a great way to kind of be interactive with your audience. So that's the formula. The reels are like I said, every other Friday. Those take a little bit more time. Those are my least favorite because I have to be thinking of like new and original ideas all the time for a reel. Like what hasn't been said a million times before, and what's something I could do that's a little bit more unique, and I have to actually
I think everything's online, isn't it?
And I mean,
find new things.
I would much rather mix a song than like set aside an hour to try and like make a really high quality reel. But
that's the thing, isn't it? In 2023, you've got to do both.
And so that's always like the thing that I dread when I look at my to-do list for the week and see, I've got to make a reel before Friday. It's like, okay. And, but at the same time, I know a lot of people get value from those, and people DM me all the time, like, that's really cool. Like, I never really thought of something that way. And so that brings me some joy, just knowing that people are getting something out of it. That makes it all worth it for me. So that's the plan. As far as like each day, how much time I set aside, most of the captioning, like if I know that I have a post going out later today, then I usually wait till kind of the last minute, because I like to think about, I like to wait and like for the right kind of caption idea to come to mind. I'll look at the image in advance, and there will be some different ideas that Samantha might suggest for each post, and I'll kind of think about those and like what's in the image, what's something that might be useful to the audience, and so that's like the actual prepping thing. I mean, that sometimes I can like 5 minutes come up with a real short, just simple caption that doesn't really mean much. Or if it's like, I really want to like dig a little deeper and come up with something that's really useful in a caption format, then that sometimes can take like 30 minutes because I overthink things and I tweak and fine tune and maybe throw it into ChatGPT and see if I can like word it a little better and all that kind of stuff. And so, there's times where, I mean, so I'm probably spending a couple hours a week on that stuff. And that's not even including like the time wasting, just looking at like what other people are doing, or, commenting or interacting
easy to scroll
with other
TikTok, isn't it?
So I mean, I don't do anything with TikTok. I'm like all about just going all in on one platform, and that's kind of where I'm at. And so it's Instagram with me. But as far as one thing that I think a lot of people do is they can easily waste an hour or two of their like time that they should be mixing, just because it's so easy if your phone is on your desk while you're mixing something, just to be like, let me like take a quick break. It'll only be like a quick second, just a glimpse and see what's going on or something. And then next thing you know, it's like 18 minutes have passed, before you put your phone down. And you do that like 7 times, that's a lot of time. That's over an hour. And so what I've found that works really well for me, I have like a little drawer in the back of my studio. And I like when I want to get some stuff done, if I put my phone in that drawer and close that drawer and it's not on my desk, I am so much more productive. So it's just that's a very simple hack that I really suggest anyone who like feels like they have a slight, even a slight phone addiction. It's just, that's something
probably
that
most people these days.
Yeah. My wife and I, like, we're on a big kick to try and like take a little less time, just looking at doing this all day, either being more present with our family or, being more present with the work that's on my plate. So, that's kind of me with social media, how I do things, how I try to make sure that I'm not spending too much time. I use the screen time application as well on my iPhone, and that kind of reminds me when I've hit my limit for the day. And once I've gotten to that point, I try to really, spend as little time as possible from then on out messing with the phone. So,
Amazing.
Yeah.
I have one last question that I ask every single guest at the end of the episode, and you can take time to think about this because it always throws everyone.
Yeah, I'm not prepared. That's for sure.
What 3 things do you know now that you wish you knew when you started in your career?
Okay, 3 things. I mean okay. I know what you're saying. I'm like almost like, what would I tell my early self in a way? Is that kind of like when I'm just getting started? Okay, that's the same as like the advice that I'd give to people who are just getting started. I think. Oh man, I could list off a bunch. I'll try and think of the top 3. Well, if you're going to be a mixer specifically, I think spend your, like, if you do have as you accumulate some money to spend towards your studio, don't get caught up on outboard gear, summing mixers, external 2-bus compressors. None of that like really matter, or like getting this like plug-in collection of like 1,000 plugins. Be focused more on getting your room like really dialed in as far as, putting up a bunch of panels. I mean, even for a few $100s, you can, go a long ways with just some 703 or rock wool and just build panels and put those in the right spot, and then invest as much as you can in your monitoring. And this is just for a mixer or probably mastering as well, is to focus on your room and your monitoring more than anything else. And maybe that means you only have a couple of plugins, but just get really good plugins and know them really, really well, and you'll do really great work. So that might be the first thing. Just don't get distracted by the things you don't need. That's the first one. The second would be maybe focus on, like, figure out where you want to go and be very focused on getting to that place. Don't just, for me, I was like yes to everything, for so many years. Like, it didn't matter how good or bad the music was or what role I was playing in the project. If you want to be whatever, mixing like top 40 pop, then you need to start, getting on that path. And that means, only taking mix work. It means trying to build relationships in that world and, listening to those records all the time, like learning those techniques. And don't, say yes to like a production gig that's going to take a month, just because it's tough because at times you got to pay rent or something like that. And it's like, oh, here's, something that's not really what I want to be doing, but they're going to pay me. It's going to pay my bills. That's a challenging place to be in, but do your best to figure out where you want to end up and try to get on that path and stay on that path. I think that's, an important thing. And gosh, so the question is something that, what was the question again?
Now.
Now.
What do you know now from your experience of the 20 years of doing this that you wish you knew when you started out? Both those first 2 you've mentioned is amazing.
Yeah.
I think
sharing. Just, Oh, here's another one. Like, understand that you're not just going to be a producer or a mixer or a mastering engineer. You're a business, and you're going to be doing invoicing and dealing with some type of accountant or CPA. If clients are coming over, you're the janitor. You got to make the place look good. You're the marketer. You have to market yourself and have a website or hire photographers. There's all these things that people don't think about or don't focus on that they should be focusing on. And I think you need to think of yourself as this complete package in this business, not just I'm going to be a really good mixer and everything's just going to like come to me naturally. Like, no one's going to know who you are. That you got to let people know who you are, what your work sounds like. And you got to take people out for coffee or for lunch, and do all those things. I mean, spend a lot of time networking. That's something else that I think there was a big patch where I was just in the studio a little bit too much and thought, I could have all these skills, but if no one knows that you have these skills, then what's the point, So not only grow as a producer, mixer, engineer, whatever it is, but also, get to know the people that, are going to be hopefully your future employers. So that's something that comes to mind.
What you said there was amazing regarding, work doesn't just come to you. I think a lot of people starting out think, hey, I'm a mixer. Right. Come on, where's all the top 40 singles coming in my way? Just,
right.
It doesn't work like that, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It's all about the grind.
It is, yeah. And you're going to be doing a lot of things that you never thought you were going to be doing. That's just part of, I mean, you can outsource a lot of that, but that costs money too. So I think, the DIY thing has always made a lot of sense for me. Like, I've always done my own website and, a lot of the marketing early on, I did all myself. So you can do it at a good price.
Well, it's worked for you.
Yeah. I mean, it has. And I'm sure there's some people that, skip that. Maybe they were working underneath someone else that was huge, and then they kind of just, grew a lot quicker, and now they have management and they have the CPA and all of those people that can help them out, and so that also happens. But if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you're trying to do it on a limited budget, then you're going to be doing things other than just audio at times,
of course.
Or at least, and if you're not, you should
path.
be.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Brent, for coming on. We really appreciate having you on. And any listeners that want to book you, where is the best place to get in contact? Of course, we'll put you all in the description and everything, but if you want to shout out your Instagram tags or any social media.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Instagram's where I spend the most time. That's at Brent Hendrich, Hendrich. And then my website is brenthendrich.com. And those are the main two things. I have just a couple other quick plugs. Like, I do a thing called Mix Assist, which I give a free 3-hour session once a month to anyone who kind of needs help getting their mix across the finish line. And so that's either bringing your files to my studio here in Nashville, if you're in the Nashville area, or if you're somewhere else, we can do it remotely, where we use audio movers and I can remote into your computer through a Jump desktop. So I know this month's been booked, but I think there's some dates this summer as well still available. So, it's been a great way for people who are kind of doing it themselves to learn a few things from someone who's done it for a while. So that's just kind of my way of giving back. And I had a lot of great mentors over the years that have helped me out. So I try to do a little bit of that, especially since I don't have an intern at the moment. So that's, we can put a link, I'm sure, somewhere for that. Or I think it's like brenthendrich.com/mixassist. We'll take you there. And then if you're ever in Nashville, I have a once a month meetup called Summing Mixer. We meet the last Tuesday of every month. I've been doing that for a few years, and it's just engineers, producers, mixers, mastering engineers, songwriters, people kind of behind the scenes. So we hang out for 2 hours. I provide coffee, and there's always, you never know who's going to show up. So it's a real fun thing. I'm trying to spend more time investing in the Nashville music community as well. So if you're ever in Nashville,
fly over.
Yeah, last Tuesday of every single month at a place called Humphrey Street. So that's the things that are important to me and that other people may be interested in knowing more about.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Brent, for coming onto the show. We really appreciate having you.
And, it's been a blast.
Thanks
for having
much.
me. All right, bye.